Hello, 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 everybody. How are you? This is the Transatlantic Call-In Show here on the line. I'm Josie Caballero, and I have with me Luxander. How are you today, Lux?
Hello. I'm sleepy. It's wintertime and I don't sleep very well when it's cold. So I'm a little like bleh. But other than that, just keeping on, keeping on. I'm getting into the whole moving across the country mode of being. So definitely a lot going on in my world. How are you doing, Josie?
I am doing great. I'm also tired because I also don't sleep very well during the holidays. No matter
Hey.
how cozy the blanket, no matter how snuggly my partner is, I still can't sleep. It's miserable.
hmm
Yeah, and then obviously the just stress of the world, as you well know.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. So all of you that are here, remember that you can call in on the show. The phone number is 720-619-2288, or you can follow the web link in description. And yeah, so remember, this is a show that you talk to real life trans people, and we love to discuss anything. So really, if you want to talk about how you believe gender and sex are the same, or don't believe that the gender identity exists at all, or if a trans woman doesn't exist at all, I would like to beg differ, as I'm sitting right here in front of you in your screen, or trans non-binary people, Lux is right here too. So we are ready to have those conversations with you from all over the world. Yeah, so I have been thinking a lot about the state of our world. And I know it's like, oh my gosh, which trans person hasn't done that in the recent like couple weeks, or every minute, or every second of every day. But I was thinking like, I've been doing this show. I know Lux, you and I have been doing this show probably for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years at this point, at least as guest. And
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like last year is when I started. Yeah.
yeah, and I was just like thinking, I was like, I like to say I'm professionally trans. I work for a a trans national organization that fights for trans rights and all this stuff. And I actually use the skills of this show just recently in one of
Oh,
the most hostile interviews I've ever had, professionally. And people would never even guess. People probably thinking, the Daily Wire? Were you talking to one of those folks? Were you talking to, One America News, Newsmax, Fox? No, it was NPR.
wow.
And it was Here and Now with Robin, and I'm call her out because it was the worst, most hostile interview I've ever had professionally. And you know how NPR you talk in this tone? Hello, everybody. This is Josie Caballero, and I'm here on NPR with
hmm
Here and Now. They kind of have that conversation. They kind of have that like bland like accent, like they're all trained to talk. So I match that energy every time I come on NPR. I sound like this, and I usually like going to NPR. I was like NPR interview, let's go. I love it. It's a fun time because I get to do that thing. I used to listen to NPR all the time in college. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be able to talk about any issue that I have on NPR. But not this time. So I just want to just give you a quick little recap of what that was like. So they start off the interview. They start off the interview before they even say my name, my title, my position, and the work that I do. They're like, we're going to talk about civility politics, about the trans rights movement and trans advocacy, and talk about how we should provide empathy to the other side. And I'm like, okay, I know. They're like doing running defense for
Oh
NPR,
no.
and I know for New York Times, the New York Times interview, which was completely awful.
Mm,
So this is what they started with. They started with an audio clip of a trans woman on a university campus cursing out a TPUSA person, which is
mm.
just like good honor. Like, let's go. Like
Who
tell them
cares?
where they belong. Yeah, who cares, right? And then she goes, and after she plays the clip, so we have here Josie Caballero, the director of voting in elections for the advocates for trans equality. Do you think that this is the right way to advocate for trans equality? And that's
Wow.
how it started. That's how it started. And I'm just like, actually, it's okay for activists to be able to advocate for the world that they see, and it's not our organizations our job to criticize other activists about how we do this work. We're
Mhm.
supposed to educate and let people know by through legislation and organizing. Then that wasn't the answer she wanted to hear. She was like, well, there's a lot of conversation about how the trans community has been very aggressive in the way that they advocate. So don't you think that it would be better if we had an empathetic point of view when we talk to these people? And I was like, let me be clear. Okay, and then I got my spicy Josie on.
Yeah.
Like, my little da, 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 was gone. I was like,
Mhm.
let me be clear here. We are gonna fight bad policy, bad bills, and legislators that are going after our safety as a trans community. And
Mhm.
we are gonna continue to organize and fight against them and continue to be strong against them. But when we're talking about empathy toward people, we're talking about our neighbors, people who are not in politics that are actually going to be doing this type of work. And so we're going to be empathetic and give people the understanding of the trans experience. Apparently, she didn't like that answer, so she immediately jumped to policing people's language with reproductive care, saying that people can get pregnant is not a thing you can do. She then jumps to Leah Thomas and starts talking about
Good
trans sports,
gracious.
and then she jumps to Seth Moulton because Seth Moulton talked about, I just want to know how trans sports is going to affect my two daughters, and then says we're two activist organizations wrong for protesting him, and then jumps to all of these really random topics. NPR interviews are usually 5 to 15 minutes max. This was
Mhm.
a pre recorded interview that went for 45 minutes.
Wow.
It was horrible.
I mean,
I
maybe if she would
almost
have
like
stopped ish
hung up on
galloping.
her.
Yeah.
I know. It was, and that's what I mean by like this show helped me be in a
Mhm.
situation where it was like I was talking to that person from Ohio that doesn't know what the hell is going on with the world, just jumping from one topic to the other topic to the other topic. And then I was just like, luckily, I had a lot of patience. So I'm just like,
Mhm.
and it just never. I hope they don't air it. I hope they don't air it at all because they're going to clip me out of context. They're going to make me
Yeah.
sound awful. Oh
They're
my
gonna edit
God.
it down
Oh
for
my
sure.
God. They're going to edit
Yeah.
it down. It's going to be a mess. But yeah, so yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, thank you to the Transatlantic Call-In Show on the line for giving me the
Yeah.
skills and the patience necessary for not ripping off her head.
Mhm. I do think that maybe next week's poll question, we could maybe talk about civility politics because of like Jesse Singal being on Blue Sky, and that's kind of a conversation that we're having in the community right now. But um, with all that being said, why don't we talk about the polls for the last week's poll? Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Yes.
So we are going to talk about last week's poll. So do you think that we can rely on democracy alone to protect the rights of minority groups? And as expected, we got 8% to 92, which is probably one of our most disparate, desperate like polls as far as difference
Hmm.
in between the two. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of obvious in my opinion. Like if you don't have organized protests outside of the political system, then you wouldn't even be able to get anything done at all. Yes, a lot of organized action lead to political action, but in a lot of ways, it is ways that we can actually create class consciousness. Like Occupy Wall Street was completely an outside democratic group, and that came together and defined the 99%, right? Class consciousness, the 1% are out to get us. Although it wasn't a very effective form of like policy change, it was a very effective way of uniting working class people to say, you know what, millionaires and billionaires are after us, and we need to be able to speak to that. And that gave a shortcut for people like Bernie Sanders to be able to speak more clearly. So I do believe non political action sparks political action, but if you don't have that non-political action, then you don't know, right? I would
Mhm.
say like let's go Boston Tea Party, bunch of hooligans going on a boat throwing boxes of tea into the ocean was not a democratic process, but it sparked possibly the spark of the revolution, right? And so it is really interesting when you start thinking historically about how this stuff works. Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think the reason why we were asking this question is because of the Supreme Court case that's being heard presently. Oral arguments were being heard last week regarding this bill in Tennessee, which was limiting the rights of trans youth to access care and raising the 14th Amendment question of, do trans people have equal protection under the law? Like, if you can give a cisgender kid puberty blocking medication for precocious puberty or whatever other issues that they may have medically, um, can you then decline trans kids to have access to that same medication for functionally the same like stuff going on with them? Like they're experiencing puberty that's distressing. A lot of the times, by the way, everybody, we give cis kids puberty blockers only if it's a social problem. Like if you're 10 years old and you start your period, they will give you that medication because it's a social problem and not necessarily because of any medical reasons. So that's the case being heard. And there's this insistence by some parties, even on the Supreme Court, that like, no, we need to leave this to the states to decide. And I think one of the attorneys was like suggesting that, like, oh, the great institution of democracy is the thing that has been the bulwark that's been protecting minority rights. And you're saying this to two women of color who are very aware, as women and as people of color, that like the the majority does not have an inclination to protect the minority, which is why we have the judicial process. And so like they're basically stating that the place of the judiciary in this conversation is to protect the minority, even when the majority, via the democratic process, is not willing to uphold their rights. Or, obviously these legislators are supposed to have been elected via a democratic process, but like gerrymandering and et cetera, they don't always do what we actually want them to do as members of the populace. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear based on not just how the system itself works in theory, but also in practice. We've seen this bear out before that we, sometimes need powers outside of the democratic process, like the judiciary is kind of outside the democratic process to protect these groups. So very heartening as always to see our audience coming out on the side of reason that like, yes, obviously you cannot rely on democracy alone for issues that affect a minority of individuals in the populace.
Agreed, agreed. So we'll read out today's poll and then make sure we'll be putting the vote in the chat. So be ready, and
Mhm.
then we'll take our first caller, and then we'll go from there. So should prisoners be forced to submit breast exams in order to keep their bras? Very interesting question. But we'll get back to you on that. Make sure you vote in the chat to see where we go, and we will go from there. So, how about we take our first call?
Let's go.
Let's go. So, our first call is going to be Dean from Australia. Hello, Dean. How are you? It looks like you do you think that gender and sex and gender are concepts that make sense, but you do not think gender identity makes sense. How about you talk to us about that?
Yeah, happy to. I'm not sure if I think Josie, you were in the chat last week. I don't know if Lux saw. So I called in last week. I just want to check if you saw that call.
I missed it.
I think I was there in the chat.
Okay, that's not so much of a problem. I just wanted to sort of know the context. So when I'm thinking about sex and gender, I had this concept, let's say, 10 years ago, before I really heard much about trans issues or this sort of idea of gender identity. Had a sort of model of the world in my head that made sense. There was this thing called sex, which is mostly like physical characteristics, and I think you guys agree with that. You think the sex is real, and there's something there that you can map that label onto. Although I think you might think that the brain is a sex organ. I think I've heard Lux say that. That might be something we disagree on. I'm not sure what that means. But then there's this separate concept called gender, and I would understand gender to be like the associations and expectations and roles that society associates with sexes. So it's things like, football might be masculine because people expect men to play football, and they don't really expect women to play football. They think it's not really a feminine thing to do. And so like that's the kind of thing that fits in gender: dresses and makeup, or I don't know, muscles and cars. And then there seems to be a separate thing again called gender identity, and I don't really know what gender identity is pointing at. And sometimes people do them backwards. They'll say gender and they mean like the identity part, and they'll use gender expression to refer to the masculinity and femininity part. So there's a bit of language confusion, but it's the identity bit that I'm not sure makes any sense. It's a bit like sort of Laplace here saying, I have no need of that hypothesis. The model of the world seems to work fine for me if I don't posit gender identity. Yeah.
Sure. So, what is your thought on sexual orientation? Do you think the same thing about that? Do you think sexual orientation is a form of identity?
No, I just think it's a preference.
But you don't think that it's like innate in somebody's identity? Like, there's a reason I'm asking this question. So just
go
ahead.
Well, I think it's innate. I think it's like an innate preference that. So I'm heterosexual. I have, sort of a preference that is sort of I didn't choose, and it seems to come sort of from the back of my brain somewhere. Yeah.
So think about so when we talk about, and the way we teach, like the things that make up a person's identity, right? In life, you've probably heard it as the genderbread man or whatnot, but this is the way it's kind of characterized. People have 4 innate things inside of them, or I would even argue 5, but I'll get to that last one in a moment. So 4. The first is sex, which you talked about, like basically, if you're born with the sexual, physical characteristics, that is that. So male, female, we're assigned that at birth, that's sex. The sexual orientation, so who and what genders you're attracted to. Your third is your gender expression. So basically putting on femininity or masculinity or something in between or neither, or however that looks. So a form of gender expression for me is that I like wearing dresses. I'm wearing one right now. And I like putting on makeup, right? That's my feminine expression that I have. And then the fourth is gender identity, and that is the internal sense of self of where you fall in the gender. So me, I identify as a woman. And Lux, you identify, would it shorthand say non-binary, or would you, I don't want to assume.
I think for shorthand, non-binary. Yeah. I'm agender.
Agender, which is another form of that gender identity. And I would assume, Dean, you identify as a man.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then there's the fifth, in my opinion, which is relationship configuration. So anywhere between 0 to multiple relationships. Most people like 1, some people like many, some people like none. And that's those are innate characteristics that we carry around with us. Like you said, Dean, you said you identify as heterosexual. You've already told me you identify as a man. Do you have a male gender expression?
Yeah.
Okay, you have a male gender expression, and you said heterosexual. You identify as a man. I'm missing one, and I'm assuming your sex is assigned at birth as a man, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'm not. You can share how, if you're monogamous or poly or asexual, whatever, it doesn't matter. Those are innate to who you are. So when you categorize gender identity in that grouping, then I think gender identity makes a lot more sense, because it's the eternal sense of self. A lot of people conflate gender identity with gender expression, but those are 2 different things. Just like a person who is assigned female at birth still identifies as a woman, but still dresses in masculine clothing would be considered butch or tomboy, and when they were growing up, they still identify as a woman, but their gender expression is more masculine. but they still identify as women, so therefore that's who they are as people. It's the same way with men who identify as men may be more effeminate in their expression and in their presentation, still identify as men. They're just more effeminate presenting men. The gender identity is what the person announces for themselves. So that's why gender
Yeah.
identity is important.
So
And it's innate,
one thing that I
like your manhood.
That makes sense. I think one thing I need to break apart here is whether the self-ID is just evidence or whether it is actually the thing we're talking about. So, for example, say I go to the police and I tell them, "Hey, I'm a thief," right? I'm sort of identifying myself as a thief in that case, and that's sort of evidence to the police that I am a thief. But what makes me a thief would be that I've stolen something, right? So it's sort of something separate. And I'm wondering if, in this case, if the self-ID is just something like the evidence you use to sort of determine, like you tell me that you identify a certain way. I sort of take that as evidence that you are that way. But is there something else on the other end of it? You said there's sort of an internal sense of self. Could those things not match up, or are they one and the same? Is it just what somebody identifies as, that's what they are?
So this is actually pretty advanced gender theory. It's performative theory. I think Judith Butler wrote about it. Basically, like, there is a kind of philosophical, fascinating question here of like, okay, if you self-identify as a woman, but you haven't transitioned yet, like, obviously society as a whole is not really going to reflect that, or they're not going to respond to that. And then you begin to take actions that conform in the way that you say, like, okay, so a thief is someone who steals something. Stealing something is an action versus like being a thief is what we would call the person who does that. It's like a social construct because the crime of theft is a social construct. So yeah, like there is a very fascinating question as to like, when do you really become a woman? Do you become a woman when you identify as one? Have you always been a woman because it's something intrinsic to you? Or do you become a woman when the community confers that upon you? It's like the idea of being cool. Like, when do you become cool? What if the chess club thinks you're cool, but the anime club doesn't think you're cool? Are you really cool? Like, we're kind of hitting on some very interesting and advanced philosophical concepts around gender and like how the world interacts with your internal sense of gender. Although something that I do want to assert here, just because you mentioned it at the top of your call, I'm looking at an article from Gilmore Health News showing some results from research done at Augusta University. The article was published in 2020, which shows that basically the estrogenic receptors, the receptor pathways in the brain indicate that basically transgender identity is likely caused by exposure to estrogen during a certain part of the pregnancy, which then gives the brain essentially an expectation of what the physical sex would be. So it's kind of like most people have a brain body map that tells them they have 2 arms. And some people who are born without 1 arm because of a congenital defect will still have a phantom limb sensation because the brain is sort of wired to have this expectation that, like, because humans always develop with 2 legs and 2 arms. I mean, typically speaking, that's considered normative. So there is evidence suggesting that human beings develop a sense of internal, what we're discussing here, gender identity, that is based on basically what the expectation of the brain is regarding like what body parts it expects to have. So if you want to research that a little bit, it's out of Augusta University. This is kind of becoming the commonly accepted scientific explanation for gender dysphoria or like transsexual like expression. So when I say like the brain is an organ of sex, it's because of this research that there is a sort of biological basis based on the exposure to certain hormones while we are in vitro, like while we're being incubated. So that's why I believe that. Like I'm not just sort of asserting it for funsies. And it's interesting to me, I guess, that you delineate between gender and gender identity, because gender is, yeah, like Josie was saying, gender identity, gender expression, the gendered expectations. We kind of lump all these things in under that broad category. But yeah, I don't want to go on too far. I know I gave you a lot to respond to there.
Yeah. After the call last week, most of my call was about confusion in language. There's a lot of overlapping terms, and so I went through, looked at like American Medical Association, Australian Medical Association, Australian Psychological, Planned Parenthood, World Health Organization, just to sort of like look at the language that they use. And some of them make this distinction. They separate out gender identity and gender, like the World Health Organization does. A lot of them don't do that. And a lot of them use, for example, like all the same words to describe all of these. So like male and female, man, woman. These will all be words that they use to describe sex and gender identity. And even they'll use words like gender to talk about sex. So people will say gender assigned at birth when they're talking about sex, or they'll say like I'm having a gender reveal party when they're really, the thing they're revealing is the sex label of the child. So it all gets very, very confusing in terms of the language. That's all right. I can understand gender is probably like an umbrella term, and it usually will encompass expression and identity. But for me, those things seem very separate because, like I said, this concept of identity as a discrete thing doesn't really make any sense to me. But certainly, expression makes a lot of sense. Masculinity and femininity is easy to see in the world.
Yeah. So, Dean, just to jump in there, your identity is man. Like that's what you identify gender wise as a man. If somebody was just to say you're a butch woman, you're just a woman that is dressing in masculine clothing, you'd be like, no, I'm a man. That's who I am. So like it's kind of like and we use this example on the shows before about how we address like the psychological condition of depression or pain, for example. Those things are things we have to take people's word for it, right? Like a psychological person. Yeah, go for it. What were you going to say?
I just want to cut in. This is why I was trying to break apart whether the self-ID there is just evidence or whether it is actually the fact of the matter. So I'll give you an example. I know that the view on the show is that race is not analogous to gender in this case. So somebody is a certain race as sort of a fact about themselves, their body or something. It's not a fact of their internal sense of self. So you couldn't be trans race. That concept wouldn't make sense.
Right.
So in Australia, for example,
well, I want to correct you real quick. Like trans racial situations, when that was used as a term in academia, it is somebody who, let's say, was white and was adopted into a Black community. And that's transracial as an experience. Just because they were raised in a Black community, that doesn't change the fact that the social construct of whiteness is still inside of that person and who that person is, but they have the understanding of Blackness through the community and everything around them. So I think that's one of the things that I try to point to specifically when people are like, well, you can't be transracial. And the idea of that is there's already a term transracial that already exists in academia, which is that particular lived experience for those people that live in those type of environments. But that white person raised in the Black environment doesn't make that person Black. So that's I think that's the delineation that we try to make.
Yeah. So I think if you met someone and somebody told you that they were Black, you might take their word for it. You might be like, oh, they might not look Black, but maybe they have a Black parent or something. You take their self-identification to you as evidence of who they are, because that's generally pretty good evidence about who someone is. But it wouldn't actually be the case unless they really did. I don't know how it is you determine someone's race, but let's say you think it's if they have a Black parent, then they're Black. You find out both their parents are white, and however you know this, but loads of their ancestors, they're all white. Then you would think, even though they identify as black, they're just not black as a fact about themselves. And
Are you
I'm
saying?
not sure.
Wait. So
Yeah,
I'm
even though they
I'm getting
identify in
lost
one
in
way, that
I'm getting lost in the example. Well, go ahead, Lux. Go. It looks like you were about to say
I
something.
can clear it up. Sorry.
I mean, these are distinct categories. Like the way that we categorize race is a bit different to how we categorize even, let's just say, sex, like males and females. Like there isn't like a discrete cultural difference between men and women or males and females in the same way that there is like a discrete historical group that is like descended from Africa and all this. Like, so when we're looking
So
at
we're all
gender,
descended from Africa.
yeah, well, yes,
Sorry.
of course. It's how it's to do with your recency. Like how recently you are a member of that sort of yeah, and like ethnicity versus race. Like there are a lot of kind of interesting things to look at there. I don't know that it's a very useful example in this case because like okay, so we have evidence that estrogenic pathways in the brain can indicate someone's gender identity. That there is evidence that your exposure during in utero might be contributing to having a brain that has this sense of self that is different from how most people have. And we have this like social structure that we all fit into. And it is basically like, okay, so gender identity is the sense of like, how do you fit within the structure of externalized gender? So, like, if you grow up and everybody expects you to play football and like be tough, and you feel like I am more like I feel like I see myself when I see other women. Like, I've known of trans people who, when they're 5 and they go to kindergarten, they're like, oh, go sit with the boys or go sit with the girls. And they reflexively go sit with the group that they identify with, not understanding that they are not that thing. Like we have this, it's like a combination of a biological structure and a social structure, which is kind of what I think Josie was getting at with like sexual orientation is we have the inclination to be attracted to this group or that group, but the construct of homosexuality is more recent. Like in like ancient Greece, they kind of had a social structure around whether you were a top or a bottom, but not around like who you're having sex with per se. So yeah, and like gender changes across cultures in a way that like it's hard to draw discrete lines of like, okay, we can look at you and determine like, okay, you're black and you have a higher rate of like sickle cell disorders or whatever. Like there aren't as many clear either social or biological markers that distinguish males and females in the same way that race is distinguished, if that makes any sense.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I should mention, since you didn't see the show last week, I don't think race is a real concept. I just think it's useful in terms of identity. So, like,
Wait. So hold on. Do you believe if race isn't a real concept, then racism's not real?
no, racism's just mistaken. Racism is part of believing in this concept.
okay.
It's not real.
I lost my camera feed. Okay, so one of the things that back. One of the things that I have to push back on you, Dean. I have to push back on you because when you say that race isn't a concept and that is real, then racism isn't real.
I think what
Okay,
Dean is getting at is
I
that
must be
race is a
misrepresenting
social
something.
construct that we've invented, which I would agree with.
Yeah, race doesn't have any basis
saying?
in reality.
Yeah,
So
I would have said that neither does gender.
I don't want to be that charitable, Lux. Hold on a second.
Sure.
And so Dean, what do you mean when you say race isn't real?
I mean, it doesn't point to anything substantial in reality. It's a delineation that seems to.
Then what is racism?
So racism is prejudice based on the understanding of race.
Okay, so how can you have one without the other?
It's a bit like I don't think religion points to anything real. I mean, like God doesn't exist, but you could still have
you're
somebody who hates somebody else.
jumping, Dean.
Yeah.
I know. I have to press on this, right? Because you're talking about actual systemic issues, especially here in the United States. I know that Australia still has to deal with this as well, with the indigenous populations as well. So I truly, you got to think about the systemic levels of oppression that happens to people who are not perceived in the power structure of society. Would you agree that in Australia, white people have the power structure?
I'm just not sure that's a sensible way to think about the world.
Well, that's how you academically have to look at race, right? Because just because we philosophically may disagree that there should be racial, divisions in how people are, are either systemically oppressed by government and oppressive structures. We can, like, for example, there's a lot of trans activists that are gender abolitionists, where they don't think the social construct of gender should exist at all. But that doesn't change the fact that gender exists as a construct in society, and we still have to interact with it every day. So the fact that you may not think that race is a factor, that doesn't mean that it doesn't play out in everyday life across the world.
Yeah, I understand it has impacts on
leads to
society.
racism.
Yeah, people believe racism is real, and that, people believe race is real, and that has impact on the way people behave. That makes sense to me, even though I don't think race is real.
Yeah, but just because you don't think race is real doesn't make it actually the reality of the social structures that we live in the world. How does that help you to completely just say this concept doesn't exist? It's kind of like the colorblind argument. I don't know if you know about the colorblind argument, where people are like, I don't see color, I don't see race, it's completely fine. But that completely invisibilizes the historical systemic oppression of people, right? So some of the most
I'm not
racist
sure
people
what that
I
is.
know are people who say that they don't see color, that I don't see race, because then they no longer give accommodations or understand the lived experience of a Black person.
Yeah, I think when people make the colorblind argument, what they're saying is we ought not treat people with distinction to their race, or like with respect to their race, if that makes sense.
But they don't
they're
acknowledge
not
the
saying they
differences,
literally
though.
can't.
But they're not acknowledging the differences, because it's the differences that cause the oppression.
There's a separation between the differences in how people are treated and how people actually are, if that makes sense. So I just don't think there is a difference in how people actually are in terms of race. I know people are treated differently based on race, but I just think those ideas of treating people differently and viewing them differently, those ideas are all mistaken. There's no actual difference.
Yeah.
That justifies.
So, do you think it would be accurate to say, Dean, that you believe race is a socially constructed concept?
Kind of. I don't want to use the word socially constructed, because it gets into a funny area where all concepts are socially constructed in a way, and it makes it hard to have the conversation.
Sure. So, like, it reflects
there's different distinctions.
I just feel like we're getting off the rails a little bit here, and I'm trying to redirect us.
And I'm trying to recenter too. So go for it, Lux.
Okay. So okay, we can look at things like melanin content in the skin and the tendency towards sickle cell illnesses. And so we can say, like, okay, there are some biological differences here, but it's not like dog breeds where like we're getting to a point where we're almost into like a speciation between like white people and Black people. And then you acknowledge that this impacts people's lived experience, that the construct of race and racism has an impact on people's lives. So we can kind of see that this is like, okay, there is a clearly like melanin content differs between groups, different facial structure exists between groups. And so we know that there is some material, like, yes, Black people need to have medical care for sickle cell illnesses that white people typically don't. But that like there's this whole social construct surrounding it, and also cultural constructs like Black people from Jamaica have a distinct culture from Black people who are in America versus Black folks who are South African, right?
No, I think
What was that?
culture and race are separate things. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a clear connection between the two things, like
There's a
Black
correlation.
Jamaican culture. Yeah. So,
Not,
and it's
doesn't
not to
seem
say
be a
like you
causal
can't.
connection though.
Sure. I'm just saying that like we can recognize that race as a concept is multifaceted and that it includes intersections with other things like ethnic culture and like what kind of food you grew up with and what language you speak. So we can acknowledge that it's complex. And that's why I would tend to say that it's a social construct, although, you know, you may disagree with that particular framework. So bringing it back to gender identity, like gender, as I'm just going to use your way of using the term of like it's this externalized thing of like expectations of masculine and feminine, etc. We could say like that is kind of similar to the social construct of race in that like there's like expectations and different groups are treated differently and all this, and we can acknowledge that gender is somewhat predicated on a physical reality. Like typically women have uteruses. Typically women are the childbearing parent. Typically there's this gendered expectation that they stay home with the children, right? But like gender identity is just like how you see yourself fitting within that group. And like, so if you're half white and half Black, do you identify as white? Do you identify as Black? Were you raised by your white parent or your Black parent? Like that can impact whether you personally feel closer to one racial identity or another, because racial identity is a thing that exists within the broader context of racial groups and the concept of race. So yeah, that's kind of how we're talking about gender here.
Yeah.
You want to cut in?
I actually, I just think you've explained my view, my model of the world, and it seems to work really, really well. So yeah, there are physical characteristics that people can point to, and they categorize them into groups called races. And I think that categorization doesn't make any sense in the reference to race. I think that it's really arbitrary, but in terms of sex, it's not arbitrary. I think it makes more sense in terms of sex to group them together. And then, you have these societal views and expectations and roles that are based around both sex and race, and to whatever extent they're justified. And then you also have this identity category, which is dissimilar for some reason. And I think both gender identity and racial identity don't make sense in terms of having an internal.
I want to clarify. I don't think they're entirely dissimilar, because I just gave the example of like someone who's mixed race, if they're half Black and half white, that they do have a racial identity that is somewhat predicated on their biological reality and also somewhat predicated on their social status and upbringing of like, were you raised by the white parent or the Black parent? Were you raised in a Black neighborhood or a white neighborhood? And that is fairly complex for those individuals. So what I'm trying to get at here is that gender identity is an internal sense of where you belong in this construct of gender. And it also tends to have some biological markers that we can point to, such as estrogen pathways in the brain, and that the only real way to determine how people identify within the construct of gender identity is to ask them, in the same way that we might say, like, is depression real? Like, okay, you have to go off of what the person says about their lived experience, and there might be an additional diagnostic criteria of like, oh, this has to actually negatively impact your life in some material way in order for us to diagnose you and treat you, which is how it works with gender dysphoria. You have to report that you have this internal sense of gender, and then you have to be consistent for a certain period of time, and there has to be some clinical amount of distress associated with like the social category that you are inhabiting or that you wish to inhabit. So when you are asking about like, what is the evidence of someone being trans, short of doing brain scans on every person who identifies as trans, the best way that we can determine who is trans or not is to ask them and to sort of measure these daily quality of life things and determine like, okay, well, transitioning seems to have alleviated some of these symptoms, and the self-reported happiness and satisfaction levels tend to increase when people are given the opportunity to transition, which we would also consider a type of evidence that transition care is real and that trans identity or gender identity, however we want to phrase it in this case, is also materially real.
Okay. So is the difference not a conceptual one? It's just an evidentiary one. That it just happens to be the case that gender identity is something that human brains do, but racial identity just is something that human brains don't really do.
As far as I know, there isn't any evidence about brains as far as racial identity goes. I think that tends to be because I think I agree with you that generally speaking, race is more socially constructed than gender identity or transsexualism, however we want to phrase that. It seems that there is some kind of innate biological thing happening with trans people. And even if there wasn't, it does seem that there is a clear like quality of life difference for people who transition. And we don't really see a broader emergent concept of transracialism in this context separate from adoption and everything. If there was like 2% of the global population identifying as transracial and like wishing that they could dye their skin or do facial reconstructive surgery, then I would say that would indicate that there's something deeper to look into. But since we don't really have any evidence of that, it really doesn't seem comparable to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanna jump in. So I think Dean, you, we kind of went all over the place in this conversation from the original question. The original question, which is you don't think gender identity makes sense. And so, we kind of went around the bend with a lot of different concepts and things like that. And with gender identity, it makes as much sense as me understanding why you're a man. Right, because I was born, the sex assigned birth is male, and I tried to live as a man for a long time. I don't understand what it's like to be a man, even though I tried to live as one for 34 years. So if I were to use the same logic that you have in this call, I would say I don't understand why men identify as men because it's fucking awful. It doesn't make sense. Like, why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you want to just be a woman all the time? And because for me, my lived experience is of that as a woman, even though I was sex assigned male at birth, right? So in reality, that's kind of what it is. And I say this to a lot of folks. I say this to a lot of people. You don't have to understand something for you to accept that it exists. And in reality, I accept your gender identity as a man, as well as I would hope you would accept my gender identity as a woman. Does that statement make sense to you?
I don't think so. You've lost me a little bit.
So where did I lose you?
Yeah, when you're saying you'd use my logic, I just don't think that's my logic. When I'm talking about gender identity not making sense, it's a bit like saying an omniscient, omni-loving God doesn't make sense. It's sort of like a concept that can't exist. I guess it's not that strong, but
yeah, because that's a big deal, right? Because the difference between the God statement and the trans identity statement is that we have clinical research to know that gender dysphoria exists, and gender dysphoria is and let me explain what gender dysphoria is because it's clinical, right? Gender dysphoria is when somebody's gender identity, a person's gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. For example, that makes them trans. So I'm a trans woman, which means my gender identity is at odds with my sex assignment at birth. So because of that, I need to have gender identity for me to get the clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria so that way I can get the healthcare and treatment that I have. That's how real it is compared to a God claim, which is completely based on faith. Right. But we have clinical research to show and point to gender identity, just like we have research and understanding to point to human consciousness. It's very real. Just because we can't explain it in a very concrete way doesn't negate its existence.
Yeah, so you are right. There's something there. that is different to a God claim. Right? God, there's nothing there at all, so he couldn't be omnipotent and omniloving just because he doesn't exist in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a bad example. Sorry. Yeah, I do think there is something there in terms of what's going on inside people's heads. They have this relationship to their own bodies and to the way society sees them and that sort of thing. I think you can explain all that with preferences and with this masculinity and femininity.
But that's
what are
expression. You're
preferences in this?
conflating the two, Dean. Dean,
Sorry?
you're conflating the two things that I talked about, which is gender expression versus gender identity. They're two different things. Just like, when we try to separate the concepts of sex. So that's what I'm trying to explain to you. So and I said at the beginning of this call, and you can listen back to it as well, which is that a woman who identifies as a woman that dresses masculine is considered a tomboy or butch in society, like a butch lesbian, for example. They live their lives as masculine, even though they identify as women. That is an incongruence of femininity and identity, or expression versus identity. They're two different concepts. That's why at the beginning of this call, I separated them into two different categories. Because somebody who is an effeminate man, I'm sorry, they're doing construction in my house, in my apartment right now. So if you hear that, I apologize. So if you have to separate the two for identity to make sense. And that's what I'm trying to get at. If you don't separate those two concepts and you conflate them, yes, it doesn't make sense, right? Because you are still quantifying somebody's want to wear makeup and dresses to that as being wanting to be a woman, which is not the case, because then drag queens wouldn't exist.
Well, no, sorry, I'm not conflating those two things. I just think one of those things is still a preference. Like, wanting to be a woman is still a preference. The same way I have like a preference for being alive instead of being dead. That's sort of like a preference.
So is your preference to be heterosexual then? Could you be gay if you just wanted to?
No, sorry. Being heterosexual is a preference for
So you're
women.
so you're just choosing to be straight.
No. I'm saying the description of me being straight describes the fact that I have a sexual preference for women instead of men.
Right. And so having a female gender identity is a description of a trans woman's preference for being categorized as a woman. It's like okay. I think part of what I'm running into right here is that you're using the word preference as a means of kind of suggesting that it's superfluous almost. Like,
no.
I prefer to not be addressed in a certain way, or I prefer to be addressed a certain way. I prefer to hang out with the girls or the guys. I prefer to be a wife or a husband. Like,
I prefer
that's what gender identity. Hold on, Dean. I'm sorry. I love you, Dean. You interrupt a lot, and I'm kind of losing my patience about it. So just give me a second to finish my thought. So a gender identity is a cluster of preferences. Preferences are innate to your brain. You cannot change them. You cannot control them. I prefer vanilla over chocolate. I can't change that. That's not actually the case. I actually prefer chocolate, but whatever. I'm just giving an example. So yes, gender identity is consequential of a number of preferences that have varying degrees of intensity. Like maybe I just prefer to hang out with the girls over the guys, but also some people are like, I'm suicidal if people lump me in with the girls versus the guys, because it's a deep innate trait that, yes, you could say like, yeah, it's a kind of preference, but it is clearly something more deep than just preference. Like, I don't prefer to eat coconut, but I continue to try coconut just to see if my taste changes over time, and I still don't prefer to eat it, right? So we acknowledge that gender identity is basically like, yeah, a strong sense that you should be aligned with this group or that group. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Sorry for interrupting. I just, when I'm talking about preferences, I'm not talking about something that's like, oh, it's just a preference. Like I prefer this over that, but like I'll take either. I mean, the same way that people have a preference for happiness over misery or life over death. These are sort of, they're best described as preferences.
I get
even
that.
If they're really important to who you are.
So just to clarify that the definitional conversation about the word preference. So Dean, do you prefer to be a man or could you be a woman?
I think I probably prefer to be a man, but that might be because I am one. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. You just did it. You did it. That's what I was trying to get you to say. You are a man and you are not a woman.
Oh, sorry.
That is exactly
man,
how I
I'm referring
feel.
to sex. I don't.
No,
not sure
I know.
when
No,
you-
see, now we're not gonna go down the road of that you just conflated gender and sex. We're going down the road that you just declared that you are a man, which is your gender identity.
Oh,
I never
I
asked
don't
about your
think
penis.
it is. No, sorry. The word "man" refers to both, and it's just ambiguous. This is the
It
whole point of the
doesn't.
call.
Not always. Not always. Not always, Dean. Now we're slipping
know what you
backwards.
meant.
We're slipping down the slope here. You got to be careful because now I'm going to ask you: is a trans man no longer a man because they don't have the sex of male?
Sorry, you say.
See what you got yourself caught into?
A man?
Yeah.
Yes, I do see what I got myself caught into. What was the question?
Okay. You literally said that man also means sex as well. So you just did the cardinal sin on this show, which is when you conflated gender and sex. Now you're gonna get me, okay? You fell into a bear trap.
I had a whole call last week about this.
I know, but this is why it's so fundamental, and I think this is where the breakdown of gender identity is coming from, and why gender identity doesn't make sense to you, because you are still, even by accident, are conflating
No, I'm trying to separate
men.
them.
Okay, so is a trans man a man?
Is when you ask that question, you're using the word "man." Do you mean somebody who identifies as male?
Somebody who
gender
identifies
identity is
as
male?
who's somebody who is gender identity is male or man or how you want to say it. But yes, the gender identity of a trans man is a man.
A trans man is somebody who identifies as male in terms of gender identity. Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, great. Now we're there. Because when you said I am a man, that doesn't matter. I have zero care which between your legs. When you say I identify as a man, you said that. You said that. You literally just did. You said because when I said, do you prefer to be a woman or do you prefer to be a man or could you be a woman? You're like, well, I wouldn't prefer because I am a man. Right? And that is exactly what the declaration of gender identity is. You did it naturally in just this normal sentence and you didn't even realize that you did it. But as soon as I said that's what gender identity is, what you just did, you demonstrated it for yourself and your own gender identity. You were like, no, man, I meant sex. And I'm like, because then you are now conflating gender and sex. The word man, because a trans man, a cis man, a black man, a blonde man, they all fall in the same category of man, regardless of what sex or characteristics that they have. That's what I'm getting to when you say I identify as a man. That is what I heard when you say my gender identity is that of man. So therefore, I could not be a woman, which is exactly what I'm trying to say to you about my trans woman identity. I do not identify as a man, and I identify as a woman because I could not be a man. It's more than a preference. It is what is so. Just like I have consciousness and you have consciousness. And if you didn't have consciousness, we wouldn't even be having these conversations. But just because I can't point to it doesn't actually make it not real.
Okay. Sorry, it's not very helpful. It's just equivocation.
Why? Well, I mean, the concept is the fact that to some people consciousness doesn't make sense, but it doesn't make it not true. And for some people, gender identity doesn't make sense.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave that to one side for a second.
Okay.
So when I say I think I am a man, I'm just referring to sex. But if the question is,
then
do I identify as a man? then
So
we have
again,
the two things that I was mentioning earlier. I would tell people the same way someone might tell the cops they're a thief. I would tell people that I'm a man because I'm just telling them a fact about myself. Right, the same way I would tell them
you
I'm
are
5
exactly.
foot.
But you know what, Dean? When you say you're a man, most people don't think about your penis. Right? They're just looking at you as a person in society.
But
oh, really? So
yeah.
when somebody says they're a woman, you're like, I wonder if they have a pussy or not. And I wonder how big or deep it is or whatever. Like, you don't, like, that would be a weird thing, right? That would be a weird thing if you're walking around society and you're just like, oh, that is a woman. I wonder, about her vagina and what it's like. Like, that would be weird, Dean.
I think that this is a rhetorical defense that doesn't work very well. You're trying to conflate.
It seems to be working against you. This rhetorical defense is working very well against you right now because you are conflating man with sex and gender again, right? Because sex, we said, is male and female assigned at birth. And now you're saying that man also refers to male, which means we have now went backwards in the basic understanding between sex and gender. I thought we were having a conversation about the difference between gender identity and gender expression, but now we're back to what is the difference between gender and sex. And so if you believe the statement that some women can have penises and some don't, then you understand that there's a difference between sex and gender. But if you don't believe that statement is true, then we have an issue.
Can I explain why that defense isn't working?
Okay, please.
Sure, but we need to wrap up soon because we have other callers. I love you both. We need to move on soon. And I will be here next week if you want to call back.
The idea that when people are interested in sex, they're actually interested in the physical bodies of other people, or that when they're using that category, they use words like man and woman to refer to sex. Or like they segregate bathrooms.
I'm sorry, Dean. I'm going to jump in here because that is you doing what you complained about earlier in the call, where you're conflating terminology about gender to discuss sex. We have different terms for sex versus gender. Man is a gender and male is a sex. So if you're going to say, well, everybody uses man to mean like sex, then you are doing the thing that you asserted was confusing at the beginning, where you're like, well, gender is different from gender expression and gender identity. Like, please,
I'm very sorry.
I had about that.
The call last week came to the opposite conclusion. I don't know if I know Arden is here. Did I misunderstand the call we had last week?
What is that?
I don't remember the details of the call we had last week. But listen, we are on a little bit of a tighter schedule and we have other callers. So why don't we put a button in this and you can call back in with Lux and I next week. Okay, Dean?
Yeah, Dean.
I'll go back and listen to the call to make sure I understand where and what.
I'm so sorry. I thought we agreed on the opposite thing last week. That's all.
I'm not paying 100% attention, so I don't know.
Yeah. So
Dr. Ben
Dean,
says no, it didn't.
So Dr. Ben was there and he said no, it didn't. So Dean, I just want you to watch back this episode.
Again.
Yeah. So Dean, I'm going to leave you with this and we'll move on to other calls. My statement of some women can have penises and some don't means that the penis is the sex and the gender is the woman. And if you believe that there's a difference between sex and gender, that statement is true. So if you believe that statement is true, then that means cis men, cis women, trans women, and, sorry, let me start that sentence over. That means that cis women, trans women, blonde women, Black women, Hispanic women, they're all in the gender category of women. So that is why it's really important to get those two things together, because we started this call between the conversation of the difference between gender expression versus gender identity. And now we have reverted all the way back to the difference between sex and gender.
To clarify.
But I want you to think about it. I know, but we lost the clarification because of the inaccuracy of how you just used your language.
Sorry,
you said you were a man.
You caught me in a trap.
That is a gender
identity.
identity.
What I've just done there, and I said, "Oh no, sorry. Here's my correction." And instead of accepting the correction, you just said you've got me.
You didn't correct it, though. You didn't correct it. You didn't. Watch it back. Watch it back.
Didn't I just say that I was referring to sex? That's the correction. Sorry, I can answer it again in terms of gender.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
you're
we'll,
right.
we'll watch it again. It was
I'll leave
really
it.
great. It was really great. Vinny, call back again. We really appreciate the call, but we do got to move on to other callers. I wish I had more time to
Sorry.
get to this, but we have a schedule. I'm sorry. I would
Okay,
go with you
thank you very
for
much.
another hour if I had to.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I
Thank
did
you, Dean.
appreciate the call.
All right.
You guys are great. See ya. Bye.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dean.
Thank you. Bye.
So I think that we should go ahead and skip ahead a little bit in our schedule since that call
Yeah.
took so long.
Yeah.
So let's talk about polls and stuff. So first of all, let's do announcements.
Yeah.
I have the calendar up, so I want to tell everybody about all the other great shows that we
Sure.
have on the line. So first of all, hey, are you listening to me? Listen to me. Hit the like button. Do it right now. Do it. That is a quick and easy way to help the show, helps boost it to more people so we get more interesting conversations in here. So hit the like button, subscribe if you aren't already, and make sure you got that bell clicked because we have some shows coming up. So next week, we're looking at Sunday. We've got the Sunday show with Matt Dillahunty and Eve Was Framed. And then we have the show later in the evening with Forrest and John Gleason. And then on Monday, we've got Skep Talk with Erika Gibbon. Tuesday is Chewed Gum with Alyssa and Eve again. We've got the Hang Up on Wednesday with Matt Dillahunty. And then next week, you've got me and Arden here on the Transatlantic Call-In Show at 2 p.m. So that's our schedule for next week. And let's go ahead and look at... do we want to do our little discussion of this week's poll as well real quick?
Just really quick. Yeah, let's go ahead and knock that out.
Okay. Yes, so we have this question of should prisoners be forced to submit to breast exams in order to keep their bras? The reason why we are asking this is because in the Florida corrections system, they are currently basically imposing a lot of extremely draconian and fascist things on transgender inmates, of which there are only about 181 in the entire state. They are going to be basically stripping them of their hormone therapy, providing them with psychotherapy instead, based on the premise that they are just like, oh, it's some childhood trauma that's causing them to be trans instead of something real. They are forcibly cutting the hair of some transgender inmates. And in this particular thing, they are having them do breast exams to determine if their breasts are large enough for them to keep their bras and feminine underwear. So we asked this kind of in a broad way because we think that there's a very clear, it would be a very obvious human rights violation if cisgender women were having their bras taken away from them in prison because their boobs are too small. And that is completely not to even discuss the topic of of course, if you take away their hormones, their boobs are going to be small, and then you can justify taking away their female clothing. It's considered contraband to have feminine underwear if you are not technically allowed to in the Florida prison system currently. So maybe we will have a follow-up poll about whether prison breaks are ethical. I don't know. Anyway, this is a horrific situation. It's truly awful, and I'm trying to make light of it because otherwise I would be kind of freaking out a little bit. So that's the basis for this question. So make sure you get your vote in, not only on the poll here in chat, which did we get a result on the poll in chat here? I think it has gone away for me.
Yep.
But you can also
95% no, 4% yes.
95.
Yeah. So, and if you want to leave any additional comments, please go to the community tab post and put your comments there, get your vote in, and make your voice heard. So with that, let's see. Are we just is it just calls after that? Yeah, I think it's just calls after that.
We're just going right into the calls. Yeah, we're just going to go in the calls.
Let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. And
we have a hard cutoff at 5, by the way. Arden and I both need to get out of here at 5. So we're going to stop taking calls at 4:30. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to say beforehand.
It's in the chat.
It's, okay.
It's in the chat.
It's okay.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know this. I would have cut that call off 20 minutes ago. It was just,
okay.
I was, yeah. Okay. So, if that's the case, what do you think about, let's see. What are you thinking, Lux? Is there any one of these calls that speak to you?
Oh gosh. A couple of these are hitting some of the same things that we were just talking about. Why don't we take 7 and then we can resume the normal course of taking the calls in order?
The numbers are not the same as the numbers that you are looking at for me.
There's 2 sets of numbers. It depends which one you're referring to.
Okay, no, I meant 7, like the human person with the name 7.
Oh, yeah.
VII. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I was looking at the numbers
from them before. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Seven, from she, her from Georgia. You have a question about fleeing the South. So yeah, let's talk
Yeah,
about it. What's up?
my name is Seven. Nice to meet you guys.
Hi.
Lux, I've talked to you before.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm fleeing the South. I live in Georgia. Politics aside, it's a swamp down here. So I'm trying to move to the mountains. I heard, Lux, that you were moving across country. I wanted some advice in essence. And
Yeah, big
and I
time.
have kids. That's a big part. Like, my kids
Yeah.
are important to me, and playing with them is complicated things a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like having kids, especially if they're still in school, definitely makes things more difficult. Yeah, I'm moving to a blue state in the Pacific Northwest. My plan is like not only to be somewhere politically safe, but also to be somewhere that is going to be relatively climate resistant. So yeah, I mean, for me, uh, I'm moving with my partner who has a lot of very expensive tools and equipment that he needs to do his job. So it's not going to be so easy for me to just like leave behind all of my belongings. Although it is something that I have stressed to people before, like if you are in the South, especially, um, like if you can sell some of your things that you're not like determined to keep with you, like that's something that I would say, like if you can part with it, then part with it. If you can replace it, then replace it. Um, I mean, obviously, because it's just so expensive. Like it's quite expensive not only to move across the country, but then you have to do first and last month's rent at a new place and all this. Um, so yeah, I mean, is there anything specific that you're like concerned about?
Well, I'm also moving to the Pacific Northwest. Neighbors,
Hello.
yay. I'm looking at Portland, Salem, Oregon. A couple places. Bend was also somewhere I was suggested. The problem is, though, I've been to Seattle. I've been to San Francisco on the West Coast. I love it out there, but I've never been there more than just a visit. So doing this kind of fresh. My move out date is in February, so I'm kind of freaking out about it.
Yeah. Mine is
just
at the end
trying
of
to figure
January,
out.
so I got you.
Yeah, and so trying to get this worked out in a short period of time is a concern. Selling things like that. But my biggest concern is that I'm trying to find a place that. So my daughter is my oldest child is just come out and said that they are non-binary, which is a complication I'm still trying to get used to. Respect that and stuff like that, but I want them to have a safe place especially to go to school in, and school systems are very important to me. Trying to find that without physically being there has become problematic because like reviews online are just reviews online.
Sure. Yeah. If so, there is I don't know if you're on Facebook. There's a group on Facebook called Moving to Oregon, where people discuss these things pretty frequently. So it seems like Eugene is pretty liberal. Portland, obviously, pretty liberal. Salem, not so much. Salem, I mean, compared to being in the Deep South, I've seen people commenting that like Salem feels like a breath of fresh air, but it is still a little bit more purple rather than being blue. There are a lot of great suburbs in the area surrounding Portland. I know someone has suggested to me that Canby might be worth looking at. It's like kind of southeast of Portland. And then obviously Seattle is going to be pretty left leaning. I'm not sure about the school systems, but again, like asking around online, both on Reddit and in that Facebook group can maybe give you an indication. But obviously in Portland, you're going to have like a pretty big centralized school system. And then it's just like, yeah, a matter of like which school in particular. I know that there are some various places where there is like a school for the arts. I'm not sure where that was. I remember reading about it though. But like as far like my suggestions, if you're wanting to move into that general area, yeah, Eugene, Portland, Seattle, those are going to be probably the best places as far as being like left wing. I know like Bend and Grants Pass, like those places are a little bit more rural red areas. Like I know Salem is in a red county. So yeah, you'd have to do a little bit more digging around to find like specific school system stuff. But as far as like which areas are going to be the best, and then obviously like if you have a remote job, that's probably going to be one of the best ways to secure employment. But if you don't have a remote job, then you'll probably have an easier time finding a place to live if you can get a letter, like a confirmation that someone is going to hire you there. Because I know some rentals don't accept out of state pay stubs to as like proof of whatever. Yeah,
that's good. That's good information. It's a complete fresh start. I work in film here in the South, so finding a union up there is something I'm still working on. I have applications and stuff like that. I just have to fill them out. But like completely starting over, even a career I've done before, I've just always done with the support of like a family member or something. Problem is like no one I know lives up there at all. So it's extremely daunting. I'm trying to figure out how to do this successfully and not endanger really my kids. I don't want to luckily selling my house gives me a little bit of a like time in essence. Money is time is money. It gives me a little bit of freedom there. Not a lot, but enough to like find something so that I'm not starving or anything like that. Finding community, finding work, really is a big part of it for me. Those are good. Like you said, Eugene. I've heard of Eugene, Southeast Portland. That's good to know.
And if you're in film, it may be that you want to go with Seattle because Seattle is proximately very close to Vancouver, Canada. And I know Vancouver, Canada is very big for people who are in film. Like they, film a lot of stuff there. So being like a little bit further north might be better for you as far as job prospects go, just with the particular field that you're in. But I would say, don't stress about the place that you move now being like the place that you permanently settle down in. I know it'll probably be disruptive for your children if they have like, okay, we have 1 year where we lived in Eugene and then we moved. But like, you just need somewhere to land and then you can kind of figure out like, okay, where am I going to buy a house? Like kind of get some of those more longer term things figured out. That's kind of my plan, at least. I'm just like literally any place that will let me move in and has the basic amount of space that I need. Like I'll figure out the details when I get there.
Okay. That gives me a lot. You guys have callers. You guys got things to do. I don't want to take up a lot of time. That last call was really long, but
no worries.
It was.
I
Sorry.
appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you.
This has been great. Thank you.
Good luck, darling.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
That
so
was
we'll
the
just
most
go
specific
down
feedback
quick.
I could possibly give back.
I love it. I love it. So
I know
we'll just
exactly
go
everything you need to know. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that, Lux. And I'm trying to speed us by because I feel awful that I didn't see the chat come through about you having a hard stop at 5. So we're gonna go right down the list, and we will get to you, callers. So please stay online. So we'll go ahead and go with Giddy from the UK, or sorry, from Utah. Him. Go ahead.
Hi.
Go ahead,
I
Giddy.
guess I'll just get straight to the question then.
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, right now the UK Supreme Court is currently hearing a case on the definition of a woman as it pertains to law. Has the US government and or SCOTUS done similar to define sex, gender, identity, etc. as it pertains to law? If not, why not? If yeah, what happened?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and answer this. The SCOTUS has not done so. The most that we have done in the United States is that we have created a level of scrutiny. In the United States, we have what we call a level of scrutiny. So the highest level of scrutiny involves race. In fact, it's one of the only things that we actually have in the Supreme Court, meaning that there has to be massive amounts of evidence and reason why you should be able to discriminate against somebody on race. It was actually not until recently they said that sex and gender have a not the highest level of scrutiny, but moderate scrutiny, which is kind of like on the fence. Now, what we have been able to get with that is we were able to desegregate schools based on sex and gender, or like there was a situation in a school in Virginia that would not let females join that particular school, and it had a level of prestige that was important for a person's career. So they had to let women in to that school because it was a form of discrimination that did not have that case. Now, we just heard the arguments for a case for SCMITI, which will create this definition possibly. There's a lot of different interpretations that can have that happen. So in the SCMITI case, currently, the lawyers, which is a trans man from the ACLU, first time in history a trans person has been able to fight open arguments with the Supreme Court for trans issues. So that's a big deal. So we have that in history. I have to note that. But what the arguments that were made were that if a cis woman can receive hormones, then a person who is assigned male should be able to have access to those same hormones, and vice versa. Because to not allow people to have certain access to certain things based on their gender or sex, mainly their sex, because they have to argue in this case because that's the way it is. They use the word hormone therapy in particular for this. Then that means that you are essentially creating a structure where some women can have this and some men can have this, or if you're biologically a woman, you have access to this medicine. If you're biologically a man, you have access to this. And that's the case, because if we were to say, and this is the way the Supreme Court is probably going to rule, because we do not have a good Supreme Court, which is they're going to rule that yes, states have the ability to not provide things for people based on sex, which will completely throw out decades of precedent and also right to privacy for people that have the right to be able to say, hey, I want this medication between me and my doctor, and it's none of your effing business what my doctor is prescribing me for my own personal health care. So this SCMITI case could actually create a delineation which allows states to discriminate on people based on sex characteristics. Does that answer your question? I know it's not great, but that's where we are.
It brings up more questions, but I'll stow them away because we don't have time.
No, well, so we only have one more caller after you, I think, and then we're doing super chats. So we do have a little bit of more time.
You can have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, so how does okay, but gosh dang, that was a lot of syllables. Give me 1 second. Okay, so to my understanding, there are already federal laws that protect against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Wouldn't this, I think it's enforced by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Wouldn't this just if those two can't coexist, could they? I might be a little confused, but
yeah.
Sorry.
Welcome to the conservative way of doing governance. You know, this is where the contradictions start to happen, right? If SCMITI says that it's okay for states to discriminate against people based on sex characteristics, well, guess what happens to Title IX? Right, Title IX that says, no, you have to have women's wrestling because there's men's wrestling in your school. So therefore, you have to have the ability for those students to be able to participate in those sports that way. So then we could lose potentially, like you said, we could lose funding for, female wrestling, female tennis, all of those different things where schools can say, you know what, we don't need to provide that because, sex characteristics no longer apply. Gender identity no longer applies. Sexual orientation is next, which you did just touch on. Right, because now once you start chipping away at the right to privacy, now you don't have the ability to actually fight back against those things. So in Hardwick versus Virginia or Texas, That was the case where a gay couple, particularly a gay man in this particular case, was arrested for having oral sex with another man in his own bedroom. And the Supreme Court said, no, this person has the right to privacy. They can have any type of sex that they want to have. That's their own business. Stop getting in the way of a person in their bedroom. So this committee case could literally throw that precedent out to the right to privacy, just like the Roe v. Wade decision that recently threw out Roe v. Wade did, which gives more precedent for the Supreme Court to start looking back at cases like Texas v. Hardwick, where states will start going after, start trying to reinstate sodomy laws. There are still states in the books right now that still have sodomy laws in place that never overturn them, just waiting for the opportunity for the Supreme Court to say this is no longer allowed. And that is specifically going to affect gay couples, because no matter how much sodomy straight couples do, which they all do, this is not going to affect them. So your train of reasoning is absolutely right, Giddy. Like, everything that we hold dear with queer and trans rights, and even just sexism in general, is going to be on the chopping block after the floodgates are opened after this committee.
Yeah, because like the way that it works, and I just want to clarify in case people don't know, like, there have been attempts to add gender identity and sexual orientation as discrete protected classes, basically. Like Biden was like, yeah, we're just gonna basically start treating Title IX like those things are discreetly included, but those are not literally included. And what we have been relying on so far has been judicial interpretations that those things fall under a type of sex discrimination. Like, if, you would penalize a man for marrying a man, but you wouldn't penalize a woman for marrying a man, then that is sex discrimination, because you're letting a man, or you're letting a woman do something, but you're not letting a man do something. And then the same, so that's sexual orientation. And then the same with gender identity. And there even was a Supreme Court case about this only a few years ago. So it's going to be real interesting if they reverse on this, because it's going to be these justices reversing on a precedent they themselves set. But it's like, it was an employment thing with like, can you discriminate against trans women for dressing like a woman? Like, well, we've considered that as a type of sex discrimination, because if you would let a woman wear a dress who's not trans, but you wouldn't let a woman wear a dress who is trans because she was assigned male, well, that's discrimination on the basis that the sex of this person is male. So we don't have clear, like, explicit protections for those things. It's just been because previous cases and various levels of courts and judiciaries in this country have determined that those things are a type of sex discrimination. But because this house of cards is built on judicial interpretations, much like the right to abortion, they can be undone through judicial action as well. Which is why it's so important to pass legislatively these protections. It's why we're so mad at Democrats for not passing legislation to protect abortion, which allowed the Supreme Court to just dismantle it. They can create it. It's like when your mom says, I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it. That's what the judges are doing in this country. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have explicit protections.
Yeah, Giddy, it's
still
a
with us,
complicated topic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not fun. Like, I took a couple Supreme Court classes in school, and woof, it is aggravating. That's why I'm able to pull up specific case law. Yeah.
Okay. Gosh,
yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Only more questions, but I'll save it for later. Thank you for answers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, and we wish we had more time, but because I could talk about this stuff all day as well. All right. Thank you, Giddy.
Thanks, Giddy.
Have a great day.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Before we take our last caller.
All right. Yes.
Super chats. Don't forget, we have this thing that we do at the end of the show now, where we want super chats, and we want you to vote with your super chats of $5 or more. So first of all, we read the super chats if you're $5 or more. And also, You can vote either hashtag Team Lux or hashtag Team Josie. You have to include the hashtag or it don't count. And we have a punishment thing where it's like whichever person loses has to defend a silly position. And you can vote on that right now. There's a poll in the chat if you take a look. Vote on the hashtag losing team's position at the end of Super Chats. So either we're going to defend ice cubes should be ice cones, we should eat tacos with a fork and knife, or socks should be worn over shoes. So you can vote on that, and you can vote with your dollars of who's going to lose and have to defend that position, whichever one wins in the poll.
Right.
So get going.
All right. All right. So we are going to take this last call from Billingham, New York. Yeah, I would love to go ahead and get this call started. What's up?
Oh, hello.
Billy?
Hi.
Hi.
One moment. How are you? I just found your show a couple weeks ago. I love tuning in.
Nice,
oh,
thank
yay.
you.
Just, I feel like mine's a little long. I know you guys are in a rush, so mine would be a very long conversation in my eyes, but I guess just basic question is like,
we have an hour and a
gender
half, to be clear.
imperative?
Our hard cutoff is in an hour and a half, so we have a little bit of time.
I was using Eastern time. I was using Eastern time.
Yes,
I was
Billy.
freaking out. I was just like,
oh, wait.
Oh, my gosh. So we have time, Billy. We have time.
Yeah, we've got time.
For you guys.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's 4:30 for me.
For me, yeah.
Yeah, okay, wow. I was just like, I was speed running. I was like, oh my god, I'm such a jerk. I didn't see. Okay, now I'm chill. Now I'm chill. Okay, Billy, lay it on us.
Well, just pretty much I always wonder if our society didn't gender is real in our society because we've made it so over the last very long time, but when it comes to just strictly biology, is there there's male and female sexes, but is there man and woman, I guess, is it a brain thing or is it a social thing? Because to me, when I think deep down into it, I come down to the fact of if there was no societal norms, it would just be everyone's fucking people. No one's a man, no one's a woman. We're all just different. If that makes sense.
I mean, both. It's a little bit of both, right? Like biological things, we can observe that they exist, and then we kind of create ideas around that. So it's like, yeah, these people have boobs, and that means that they can breastfeed. And so let's create a gender category where those people stay in and take care of the babies or whatever. So there is a physical thing that is influencing this concept, right? But then it's kind of feeds back both ways. There's a biological thing that then creates a social thing, but then there's a social thing that influences us to some extent epigenetically. Would I feel strongly about being called female if we didn't have this entire construct around what being female means and what it implies? I would probably still have the sense that there are body parts that I should or should not have. That part seems to be somewhat biological or innate. That sense of my body is different. No, go ahead.
See, when I think about it from that aspect, I'm in that society, there technically wouldn't be gender dysphoria because there's no gender, but there still would be body dysmorphia.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Once again, it's a society that doesn't exist. I get lost in these things too often.
It's the Star Trek society. Yeah, in the future Star Trek universe, you could get the procedure done and it wouldn't change anything about how anybody sees you. Transgender wouldn't be a discrete category. Male and female probably wouldn't be a discrete category. This is what I like to think of as I like to call it the gender anarchy future, where it's all the old West.
That's
Nobody gives a shit. Yeah.
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 Well,
another.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead.
It has somewhat to do with it, but in regards to another thing I wonder about is, since we've had these gender roles for so long, how has that influenced evolution of the body? that's just another random has to do with it thought. But continue. What were you saying?
No, I would love to chat about this for a second here about like the anthropological social construction of the gender roles in the first place, right? And I think it's important to be stated that gender identity comes and not gender identity, sorry, but gender social construct exist from what we used to call pan-Europeanism. And pan-Europeanism essentially then became whiteness and then colonialism, right? And which pan-Europeanism started to spread. Because if you look back in throughout history, especially in European history, there were, European women would be in really frilly dresses with, the umbrellas and, all of the things you would associate with like the Renaissance and and like that portion of time, even in like you look back at the royalty and the queens versus the kings, and there was distinct differences in the way that those things would show up, especially if you think about monarchies, right? Like the first boy, right, gets to be the next royalty. Even in England now, we have that, right, where that is. Even though they've had female queens with both Queen Elizabeths that existed, it still was a very uncommon thing to see a queen of the monarch of a European nation. But as colonialism started to spread across the world, they would essentially say that Black people of Africa, Asian people, they would say they are genderless savages. And what they used was they would say the key marker of civilizing. Oh my God, civilizing, there's the word, civilizing the places they were colonizing, is that they would create strict gender roles within these communities, and then they would say, now we know which one is the man and which one is the woman, so therefore we can now civilize these populations. And then that then started to get propagated across the world. As you know, European colonialism is something we deal with to this day across the world. And now we have a strict gender construction on every corner of the planet nearly. And so now what we look at when you're talking about this conversation is the deconstruction of that, right? Which I do believe that to deconstruct gender is essentially to deconstruct colonialism, which is a concept that academics have been scratching their head about for a long, long time. And so I know that's very academic, because I went through an anthropological social lens of like throughout history and where gender even comes from as a social construct. That's where it begins.
You just blew. This is like, I can rewatch this later and show my cousin that got me into all of this, right?
Yeah.
This is okay, good, because I never thought about it from that lens. And me and my cousin, we always get into arguments, not arguments, I would say discussions more so, about this stuff. But I can't wait to. They're very much gender anarchist leftists, and they're the reason I got into it, kind of. But that was a perfect response. I never thought about it from that lens, and things view much clearly now. If you have anything more to say, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when you and I appreciate the openness, because when we look at that construction, it really becomes one of the questions. And we just had a whole conversation earlier at the beginning of this call about the difference between gender expression and gender identity and sex, and the whole concept of doing that. Yeah, right. The whole concept of that is squishing all three together to make it easy so humans fit in two little boxes. And so when you start to so when you start ballooning it out and you say gender expression, gender identity, sex. And then when you balloon it out even more, you can go, oh, all of these are spectrums. And then you go back even further, it's like, do these spectrums even matter? And then you go back even further, it's like, are these oppressive? Right. And so it is going down the road of how everything that we deal with in our society from the moment we are born, there is an entire structure that is built around a person based on how they were born and how they're assigned at birth. There's a whole legal structure that follows that. The IDs, the names, how difficult it is to change, being drafted in a draft. Yeah, all of it. All of it. And so when you go all the way back to like the idea of oppositional sexism, so why make a gender construction? Well, you make a gender construction so you can have oppositional sexism. Yeah, for sure. So oppositional sexism is essentially masculinity is strong and femininity is weak. Masculinity is more independent, while femininity is more dependent. Masculinity is more gruff and rough, while femininity is more nurturing, for example.
It pisses me off even to hear it all, because to me it's just like I can feel anything I want and still just the fucking label. Excuse my French, I don't know.
Yeah.
You're fine.
And that label is what allows the oppression of one group to another. Right. And so when you have the gender construction, even in the first place, thank you, pan-Europeanism, right? Essentially whiteness and colonialism. Like now we have a group inside of every community that says one hierarchy is more powerful than the other. So therefore you can always oppress the other side with half of the population or less in a lot of cases. Then therefore it's easier to control the populations when you divide them so effectively. And that's happened. That's why we live in patriarchy, right? Think about it. Women weren't allowed to own credit cards a few decades ago unless they had the sign off of a husband.
Most billionaires alive today, I read this the other day, were alive in times where women weren't allowed to form a line of credit. So how the fuck can you say that men are better with money when just that? Yeah, that was a whole thing I got deep dived into a couple of weeks ago.
Exactly. So and this is what you learn in basic gender studies. Oh my God, they're vacuuming into space. I'm so annoyed right now. I don't know if you can. Lux, does it sound really loud? Okay,
super
good.
Quiet.
Okay. So essentially, when we start looking at all of these things, and you start looking at all these oppression structures, you start looking at how historically gender roles have completely subjugated an entire population of people. And then you start dividing everything up into even more boxes with race. You start dividing even more things with land ownership. You start dividing everything else into tiny little pieces all over the place. And now you're having people going to one bathroom and the people going to another bathroom. And then you have like these people go to this school and this people go to this school. And then all of a sudden you have everybody divided into small little groups. And then you say you are the chosen group that's going to be strong. And that little group is like, wow, that sounds like a great idea. I can oppress everybody else and get all of their wealth and all of the power. Okay, great. I sign up. And then all of a sudden, you no longer have community. Exactly. Then you don't have any community cohesion. And now it's easy to completely roll over. And Exactly. Yeah. So therefore, that's how colonialism was so effective. They started creating groups within
the widespread that it's hard to change everyone's mind at the same time. Apologies.
Exactly. No, and so therefore, and I'm the political girl on the line here, right? As far as on the channel as a whole.
Is this Luxander or
this is
that's Josie speaking?
Or which one? I'm sorry, I just started listening. to you guys
I'm Josie.
Weeks ago,
so I'm Josie Caballero. Yes.
Okie dokie.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why, and this is me doing some post hoc analysis of the political situation of how we lost this election. And I will say this: Donald Trump will go down in history as the great divider, right?
Oh yeah.
And if he's the great divider and he was able to gain power when we have been more divided than we ever have, he gains power through deeper division. And so that's why my whole ethos right now currently with the restructuring of the Democratic Party is that we have to stand stronger on our values and take people in and hold them close, like trans people, queer people, all the communities, and hold up and don't retreat on any of those issues. Because if you turn the queer community against the Democrats, well, guess what Trump gets to do? He gets to put his little fingers in between the cracks of the Democratic Party and rip it open. Right. And that is
the wildest thing. AOC voters voting for Trump. I'm sorry, continue. I do have a tendency to
that was
interrupt.
crazy to me.
Yeah, well, that's the whole purpose, right? He finds division even in the own ethos of the people who are voting for people like AOC, and divided it amongst establishment and people who think this person's authenticity versus non-authentic. So every day in this country, we are creating more and more groups. You have the pro-Palestine people, you have the pro-Israel people, you have the anti-vaccine, you have the pro-vaccine, and we keep getting divided and divided and divided into smaller and smaller groups, which makes it impossible to be able to organize all of them in a unified message under a better banner that actually helps us get a better world. And I know, and I love this conversation right now too, Billy, because this conversation started with why gender, that's how fundamental this is.
Oh, see before, like months before the election, at first I was thinking, at least if Trump wins, I'll think we'll move very far left in 4 years. But then I started getting closer and closer, and I was like, wow, even if that does happen, he could fundamentally change the Democratic system to make it so that can't happen. And he already has so many fucking people, excuse my French again, brainwashed that,
Yeah. It's a hard one. And I can pontificate on this point the whole time, but Lux, I would love to hear what you have to say.
I mean, yeah, like I would hope that we would be able to. I think the problem with the Democratic Party, like on the federal level, I'm not necessarily going to cast aspersions on every Democrat like running locally, but at the federal level, at least, it's very frustrating that we had this campaign that kind of already tried to distance itself from the issue of trans people, and it lost spectacularly. And yet the response from the Democrats is like, oh yeah, let's distance ourselves even further. Let's throw trans people under the bus. Yeah, let's do it harder. And it's like, how are you going to build coalition? Yeah. It's just frustrating.
So, Roy, if you saw that podcast with the campaign staff afterwards, they're so delusional about what they thought they did wrong. What you did wrong is you focused on, oh my God, everyone hates Trump. That's how he won last time. Let's do it this time. Well, this time, it wasn't going to work like that. And they didn't want to listen to anyone.
Yeah, and clearly people were dissatisfied with what was going on with Biden. And like, instead of validating that frustration and trying to distance herself from him, she's like, yeah, I'm just basically going to do all the same things that Joe Biden has done. It's like, okay, so all the Democrats who want you to do something else, who were disappointed in Biden not doing the things that they expected him to do in the first place, like, okay, we have had no conversation about minimum wage. We have had no conversation about legalizing cannabis. We have had no conversation about, like, any of these issues that are super important to progressive voters. Like, there is no such thing as a progressive party in the United States anymore. And it's really frustrating. And it's like, I will vote, but I'm not trying to like participate in it anymore in that way. I'm like, I'm going to go live the anarchist life that I want to live by getting to know my neighbors and growing my own food. Like, I don't know what else to do at this point.
The Democratic Party is practically just center. Like, I'd honestly say center right if you ignore social issues. But by that, I just mean racism, homophobia, and transphobia. And even then, they're not good at that at all.
Yeah. Yep. So okay. So I haven't expressed this on the show, and then after that we'll wrap up so we can get the super chats in our competition.
Yeah.
So so one of the things that I look at the Democratic Party, and so this is hot off the presses Josie thoughts. So strap in, everybody. Oh, you're. So here it is. I don't know if the chat is familiar with a party that was called the Whig Party. The Whig Party is what the Republicans became. So the first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln. Now, before Abraham Lincoln came around as the first Republican, the Whig Party was really large, really big, and it had a really big tent ethos on this. And however, they were wishy-washy and mealy-mouthed on everything. Some of them were pro-slavery, some of them were anti-slavery, but those two things are things that can't coexist. You can't have a party that is pro-subjugation of a human and the other side of it saying, yeah, let's keep it. Right. And they kept on trying to do these compromises, these grand bargains between like some states will have slavery and some states won't. And then we'll all be in harmony and we'll all live together. And people didn't want that type of situation. Now, the other party that was in power, which was the Democrats, they were still reeling from the Andrew Jackson era. Andrew Jackson was basically the founding father that would be closely connected to Donald Trump. He was an authoritarian. He broke a lot of legislative processes. He literally ran up on a conference table and hit a person with his cane as a member of his cabinet, like straight up, like violent, angry, was very pro like genocide of the Native Americans. Very, very bad person. Andrew Jackson he shouldn't be on the $20 bill, right? He's so vile in our American history process. So a lot of people didn't want to vote Democrat either because they didn't want the legacy of Andrew Jackson to continue. But the Whigs were not a party that could be trusted because they would either be pro-slavery one day and anti-slavery another, and they just wouldn't stand true to their values, which made them very weak. Then Abraham Lincoln came around and was like, you know what? We're going to end slavery, damn it. That's what we're going to do. Chattel slavery is a problem. It shouldn't exist. It is barbaric, and humans have no business doing this to each other. And he actually unified the Whigs behind that message and actually brought people from the other party, was like, yeah, I agree. We shouldn't do this anymore. And we should actually try to keep the Union together, because people felt that the Civil War was coming before Abraham Lincoln even stepped into the scene. People knew that people were angry. Does any of this sound familiar? Right? Like you know, yeah, and so now if you take this example and you look at who are the Democrats, well, to me, they're the modern day Whig Party. They're the group that is for the minimum wage, Medicare for all on one side, and then pro-corporate insurance power on the other, right? You look at, we have Bernie Sanders and AOC over here saying that healthcare insurance companies are a scam, yet you have the, Healthcare United, which I'm going to use United Healthcare as an example because everybody hates them after their CEOs got, taken out due to the armed resistance of the United States. Now everybody's like, oh my God, United Healthcare sucks. And then you go, wait, where does United Healthcare donate to? Oh, they donate to more Democrats than they do Republicans. What the hell? What's going on? They donated more money to Harris than they did to Trump. What the hell? And now we're trying to have these two incomparable points of view trying to hold together this party, which brings it into this point where nobody trusts what they look and what they sound like. Are they pro-business? Are they going to talk about minimum wage? Are they going to be for trans people? They're not going to be for trans people. Are they going to fight for civil rights? Are they going to actually say the word abortion? Are they going to say gender affirming care? Do they believe in anything? Mm-hmm. And that is how people believe about the Democratic Party. It's the same way the people of the Whig Party felt about their own party, and we're ready for something different. We're ready for something new. And so we're at the breaking point. We feel like there's a civil war coming. Some people do. Some people do. Some people think that there's going to be some level that is going to be a breaking point. I mean, Trump is about to release and pardon all the shock troops, the J6ers, right? He's going to release them from jail, so the shock troops are ready. So we have all of these things happening right now in society, and something's going to give. And I don't know what that's going to be. Is it going to be, the progressive left wing of the Democratic Party saying, if we give up, we're going over here and start a whole new thing and be the new party that Lincoln did before the party switch, right? When the party ideology switched from Democrat to Republican, where liberals went one way and Republicans went another, because that party switch happened in the early 1900s. Or are we going to just rebrand the party and kick all the geriocracy out, right? The geriocracy. I can never say that word. Gerontocracy. The gerontocracy meaning the old people, the people like that aren't retiring, the Bidens, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, all of those people. Even, Dianne Feinstein died in office. So did Ruth Ginsburg, right? We love them, but they should have left. I didn't love. I didn't love. I did not love the senator from California that was there forever. So I don't love any of those older folks that didn't pass the torch. So
I just hope we can
that's
get
where we are in
country
politics.
on board.
What was that?
I just hope we can get enough of the country on board, rather than now we have three parties where half the country is Republican, and then we have half the country that, or I mean, it wouldn't be half, but that's split between the split Democratic Party. And it's just, I'd rather just I'd love a freaking zombie apocalypse right now, but that's just me.
well, and for
bird
me,
flu.
well, bird flu is coming. But I will say this: something's got to change, and there are a few things that I'm looking at. If Rob Emanuel gets elected to chair the Democratic Party, kiss it goodbye. We're done. Like, we need something different. Like, the Democratic Party is toast. They're cooked. It's over. Right now, if they choose somebody that is much more in line with the progressive movement and actually looking for actual change, if they actually put people like AOC in leadership, if they actually listen to Bernie Sanders' warnings and actually bring real people in that have a populist economic message, because the people who voted for Bernie were not Democratic voters. They were Bernie voters. The people who voted for Trump were not Republican voters. They were MAGA voters. The parties themselves are not what people are loyal to. People are loyal to the people that are promising them a populist message that is actually going to make radical change in their lives, because everybody's freaking hurting right now. And so I know I went on a huge tangent about your question about why gender, but this is one of the things that keeps me up at night thinking, what is next? What is going to happen? And that's why I tell every radical I know to run for office, because it's an act of defiance. Right. When you run from the outside of the system and you take over like the Democratic apparatus or whatever you do, it's an act of defiance. That's what we have to do. We can no longer let the Democratic Party say, oh, there's a line here. You have to wait your turn. Fuck that. I'm tired of that. I don't want to see the situation where what got us here.
Stop relying on parties.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Well, the part. Yeah.
What would happen
and that's what has happened.
Next election cycle, you had 30 random civilians that weren't affiliated.
Well, we almost saw that happen in Nebraska. A person that was running for Senate was an independent and almost beat the Republican there. It was really close. It was really close because that person was running economic populist messaging.
We can start that progress.
Right? Yeah, but the thing is, anyways, I could go all day on that for sure. I could. I know I've said that on all calls, but I'm serious about this one because I've been thinking about it a lot. Yeah. I know. That's why we need to have a political call-in show on the line. I've been asking for that for a while. So submit your request. What was that, Billy? I think your phone went to sleep.
Well,
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I said, well, I hope they listen to you because you seem very educated, and it would be fun to listen to you debate with someone that I like listening to debate with people that don't agree with you, but specifically on politics, I love watching people debate politics.
Well, go. You type in our name and look at the line. There's a lot of content that we had before the election that I definitely went on for a long time.
I honestly probably have seen it. I just don't know that it's the same network, probably. But I'll let you guys get on to the next caller because I had a blast talking to you. I hope the next person does as well.
Well,
thank you, Billy.
You're our last caller, but we really thank you, Billy.
Oh, well, you enjoy the rest of your podcast. Have a great night.
All right.
You too.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks for letting me go off there a little bit, Lux.
No worries.
You know me.
I'm so tired.
Honestly, like the line is like a perfect place where I get to like give a lot of my unfiltered ideas that actually turn into real stuff. Like you don't realize, like I'm driving around and I will be thinking about these things, or I'll be like sitting there like in my bed just being like, the wigs. Let me do more research on them because like seriously, like it's just like I am that nerd. Like I'm just like, oh my gosh, you know what? Let me look at this again. Let me figure this out, and then you can draw these parallels. Like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? Like that's how it goes, right? It's like it is something that we need to really come to terms with and learn from our mistakes. And I'm working right now to try to figure out like what is the best chair of the DNC, because I might get an appointment before that vote. Like I seriously could be somebody who votes in that actual election for the chair of the party, and I'm looking for the person that's going to carry us through this crap. I don't want more of the same. The Obama era of politics is over. And I say this, right? And then we'll move on to the super chats. I say this. Obama beat Hillary. The next cycle, we ran Hillary. Hillary beat Biden. The next cycle, we ran Biden. Biden beat Harris. The next cycle, we ran Harris. We keep running losers. We keep running losers in the general elections. It's so dumb. Like it's wild. I hate it. Like, will we ever see Ted Cruz run again for president? Probably not, because he got his ass handed to him and he understands that the people don't want him. Right. And so that to me is where we need to learn our lessons. Like, we need to stop this gerontocracy of these massively ancient humans that are trying to wave their wand saying, no, you, no, you, no, you. It's like, I'm over it. I get so mad. It's so mad. Anyways. All right. So let's get to some super chat.
Yes. Don't forget, everybody, you can get your votes in. $5 or more super chats. We will read them. And also you can vote #Team Lux or #Team Josie. Make sure you get the hashtag in there. The loser has to defend a silly position. What did we have a conclusion on that poll, Arden?
It looks like right now, should eat tacos with fork and knife is destroying the other two tacos. So I'm going to be that one.
So whoever loses is going to have to defend the position that tacos must be eaten with a fork and knife, which just feels bad to say.
Yeah, and if you want to see Lux, if you want to see Lux defend that, make sure you type in #Team Josie.
That's true. All right, I'll take this first one. £5 from Mystic Minds Analysis Tavern says, Jeremy Corbyn may be starting a new UK party soon. Hopefully this will provide a strong opposition to Labour, who hamstrung themselves to get him out. Yeah, God. Y'all are having the same problems in the UK where, like, the Labour government is basically a centrist government. You've got the Green Party, but they don't get the votes. So, God bless. Good luck, you guys.
Yeah, no kidding.
I say God bless. I realized I was on an atheist show. I say that ironically. I don't believe in whatever.
Yeah, I just use it ironically.
It's just like a cultural thing. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway, sorry.
Lux will just ironically say Jesus loves you.
Yeah, God bless your heart.
Yeah.
Anyway.
$5, I think Australian, from Tammy B. I'm taking progesterone as a male to female transgender. I heard it gets converted into testosterone. How does that help? It's not
I don't think that's the
so
case.
much. I don't think it's the case. I think it actually gets converted into estrogen in a lot of cases, but if you're taking the right level of spironolactone, then you should be fine, or whatever your equivalent in your country that does the suppression part. But ask your doctor. That's what I say.
Yep. There is this thing where, like, if you have extremely high levels of testosterone, it reconverts into estrogen, or if you have extremely high levels of estrogen, it reconverts into testosterone. But that would be like you have other health problems also from having that high of a level. Like, you would have other health complications before it starts converting back into the other thing. So anyway.
Yeah.
20
So you read
pounds from
this while
Jackie
I go and
Greenland.
get my dog out of
Do your
doggy
thing.
jail.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Doggy jail. Oh, yeah, the construction. Okay, so 20 pounds from Jackie Greenland says, my heart breaks for British trans kids this week, as not a week after France agrees on the medical consensus that treating trans kids with puberty blockers is good, West Streeting bans them for trans kids. Sad face, hashtag Team Josie. Yeah, I saw that. Like, they were already talking about, like, this has been a protracted conversation in the UK for forever. This, like, do they get to have hormones or not? It seems like there has been a new announcement that they're just saying they're illegal, like, multiple times. Like, I don't know how much more inaccessible it can get, given that we've had this conversation so many times. But yeah, obviously, like, we've been running into this issue in the United States. They're not making puberty blockers illegal, period, because of a lack of medical evidence of safety and efficacy. That it's only for trans kids. Only for trans kids. So yeah, it's pretty awful. I feel bad for them.
That it is. Thank you, Jackie.
Yes, thank you.
And give me that point. I saw it.
Yes.
You can't.
Arden was busy typing in the chat.
Oh, is that what's happening? $9.99 from Luis Richardson. I never heard anyone else say they felt this way, but I always felt that I could have had a space inside me where my vagina would be just the opposite of the phantom limb. You know, I also felt that way too. It's a really interesting point of view as well, because I always did feel that. So it's really interesting you say that. I was thinking about that when you were talking about the body map distinction. So yeah.
Yep, there's an expectation that something should be there or something shouldn't be there, and yep, that's kind of the operative thing. Thank you for the 10 Canadian units from AWJ Funk. Says, hey, never get to watch live. Glad I caught you today. Keep killing it. Gonna keep bringing it every week. Thank you.
$5 from Monkey, a typewriter. Dean needs to study before he calls again. He was lost for a lot of the call. I think that's why the conflations kept going. Hashtag Team Josie trap card. Yeah, I appreciate that. It was a trap card. I was so ready. It was like that's why I asked the question. And it's like, so you could be a woman. Well, I am a man. That's exactly what we say.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely brought some of my A game for that call too. It was
good.
You were on fire, Lux. It was really good.
The Ritalin was hitting. Yeah. $5 from Aliashana Silverbow says, Josie's trap for Dean was chef's kiss. Why are chefs so mean? They're always beating eggs. True. Hashtag Team Josie. Yeah. I could say something about beating eggs, and I won't. But all of you know what I am hinting at. All the trans people in chat know.
You gotta hatch them. You can't beat them. You'll break them too soon.
That's true. I meant a different kind of beat, but whatever. Anyway, now the Ritalin's wearing off.
All those little... the other edge of that sword. $5 from Skiptoides. DeSantis, fuck trans people and drag queens. Also DeSantis, these boots are made for walking twirls, and just what they will do. Hashtag Team Lux. Agreed. And Skiptoides is great because Skiptoides follows me on Blue Sky, And if you don't follow me on Blue Sky, you're doing it wrong. I think one was skipped.
I think we're all off of Twitter now. We're all on Blue Sky, so follow us on Blue Sky. Do it.
Yeah. Josie Rosie.
Yes, true. 20 Australian units from Dean, who, thank you very much, is leaving us a little bit of an apology. Says, sorry about the call length. I didn't mean to suck up all the time. I love what you do, and I really appreciate the conversation. Keep on being awesome. I hope things get better for you in the USA. Yes, I think it was a little bit frustrating, but I ultimately feel like we made some progress in that call, and I hope that, we can keep making more progress to a mutual understanding further we get with that.
Yeah.
It definitely felt better than with some oppositional callers.
Oh yeah, Dean. Like I'm happy with the way it went, and I'm always going to, slap every time I see a conflation of gender and sex. That's kind of like my thing on this show. Is you did the thing. I'm gonna make sure we call it out and figure out why that happened.
I think Dean has a preoccupation with like philosophical definitions, because the last time he called, he specifically said like, oh, I'm happy to use whatever name or pronouns. I think you guys should have access to medicine. It's all evidence-based. But it's like a concern with like philosophically, like ontologically, are you a woman? And those are the conversations that I always find are not as useful.
I find them interesting, but it's like, I'm sorry, that's a high level, even within the community. Like I said about performative theory from Judith Butler, like, at what point do you become a woman? Is it something that you can state, or is it something that the community confers on you? And like, it's complicated because woman is both an internal identity and it's something that exists externally as a construct. So yeah, I find it interesting, but it can be a little bit difficult to get on the same page when we're dealing with like stuff that even trans people find philosophically challenging. So anyway, I think this one's for you.
$10 from Jack to Cabe. Hashtag non-binary. Hashtag Team Lux.
Boom.
Looks like Team Lux
I don't think I'm going to win. I don't think I'm going to win today. I think that it's going to end up being another Josie win.
It seems like this is your strategy here. And you know what the worst part about it was? I was sitting, so my mom, I walked in when I was in Texas. I walked in and I saw her watching the stream of us.
Oh no.
The one on Thanksgiving. And I was like, what are you watching? She's like, I actually like this. This is fun. And she was just watching the super chats and not the debates. She just likes watching the super chats. So when you ended up winning, she's like, this isn't fair. You should have lost. I'm like, Mom, it's fine.
I feel like, when you're on, you frequently take it in a pretty clean sweep. So, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the 10 Canadian units.
Yeah.
I don't know whose turn it is.
That's you. No, go ahead. I think it's your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you for the 10 Canadian units from Quantum Chaos. Says, like any good leftist, I've decided to throw away my vote on a third-party candidate who can't technically win. I've been told by callers here that it's the correct thing to do. Hashtag Team Dr. Ben. Hashtag I'm helping. I don't know what show you're watching, but I don't ever see people defend the position that you should vote third party here. Maybe I just missed those calls.
Yeah.
But everybody seems to universally hate third-party voters.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because of the American system. It was more of the conversation was about like in the situation with the vote in Nebraska, like the independent almost won because the Democrat had no chance of winning there. So it was that situation where I was like, no, you vote for that independent because that almost independent. I think that independent lost by like 3 points or 2 points. It was like super close. It was like wild. That could have
local elections
apple cart a little bit.
It can make a bigger difference on the local. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. When there's actual but for president, no, don't do it. We'll figure it out though. We'll figure it out. Don't worry. I'll have good answers in 4 years. All right. $10 from Mr. Barigua. 10. Glad to have made it while at work. A short show. Hashtag Team Lux. What study from my old uni is good stuff. Mixed feelings about the school though. Enjoyed my time, but I got fricked over. Still better.
Augusta University, I guess, has a mixed.
Lux, I was gonna push back on you on that call a little bit, but we can save it for another time because it's like I just don't like going into the biological, wow, all right, apparently that just happened, my trans flag
I
fell off
mean,
my
if
wall
somebody
there.
is gonna try to say, like, gender identity doesn't make coherent sense because the only evidence we have is what people say, then I'm gonna say, well, we do have evidence that suggests that there is a biological component. That doesn't mean that I think we should rely on a biological component to give people, like, the access to the medication or whatever, because that would be untenable. But, like, if you're gonna argue with me that it's esoteric or that it's just a preference, then I'm gonna call back to the research, which this has been, like, a growing
Yeah.
area of study. So,
I get
yeah,
I
I'm
get
not a
worried
fucking
about
trans
that.
medicalist. I wanna be clear.
I know. It's just I get worried about, like, people search for the gay gene, right? Like, it's just like, it doesn't
Yeah.
exist, it doesn't happen. You're never gonna be able to find a direct correlation of those things, so for me, it's just like, bah, I don't care, right? It's
Yeah,
just it's
there are
about people's social
indications.
determinations.
There are
Yes.
indications that there is a biological basis. It's not determinative, though.
It's definitely not determinative, and we should just always be cautious when making that argument because some jerk out there is gonna be like, "Until you can prove that you had a hormone wash during during." It's just like,
Yeah.
now
And,
it's
like, do we
becoming
study
weird,
non-binary
right?
people? I don't think we do. Like, what happened to my brain? Like, my mom has PCOS, so it's likely that she had a hormone weirdness while she was pregnant with me, and also she was a teenager, so that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Could
But
you,
yeah, they
like,
don't study non-binary
I
people.
always think of, I always think of, like, the most, like, dystopian book, like, theme out there where they are testing with, people that are pregnant, and they're, like, in vitro, they're like, "Okay, we're checking the hormone levels of the baby inside your womb to be able to
Mhm.
justify if they can be trans or not," and then we live in that dystopian world, and I'm just like, "Ah!" I just get so worried about things like that, right? It's just like it's like science is cool to understand, but it's not determinate and should never be. So I'm always super nervous about those conversations though. So,
Yeah.
but I'm
If
the
they
social
find the
girl.
gay part
I'm
of the
not I'm
brain,
s
they're gonna lobotomize it, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, so we just need to give you more hormone washes in the opposite direction. Testosterone shots for the trans girls and
What's
more
really
estrogen for the
interesting
trans boys.
What's really interesting is that it actually the indication from this study that I was reading is that increased estrogen masculinizes the brain, which
Mm,
is so weird.
mm.
Like, I don't know, it's just like the opposite
Yeah.
of what you would expect.
Yeah, exactly. I always think it's just the most bad faith interpretation of any study like that. It's just like, I don't like
Yeah.
it. Anyways,
I
$5
don't know whose
from
turn
Luke
it is anymore.
Anderson. Neither do I.
Go
Much
ahead.
love to Seven. Washington or Oregon will be bulwarks in the upcoming political storm, or the coming political storm. We welcome everyone. I'm thinking about PNW line meetup with would be super fun. Oh yeah. If you are doing line meetups, make sure you let us know so we can help promote those type of things.
Yeah. Am I gonna be the only one who's up there? I don't know if any of the other hosts are up there. $5 from Alyssa Silverbow says, I went to a restaurant on the moon. It had great food, but no atmosphere. Hashtag Team Josie. That was a good one. I like that
Yeah,
one.
that was a good one. I like it too. Love a good science joke.
Mhm.
$5 from Taylor Made at 28. Josie, you have the best laugh on the line. It never fails to make me smile. Lux, you have the best name by far. Love you both. Hashtag Team Josie. Thank you.
Mhm. I saw the 3 = 4 for a second there and was
I
like, "What
saw
is
that
happening
too.
to the vote count?"
I
It's just a
had
little
my
typo.
pinky on the backspace and it slid off and hit the equals instead.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How dare you?
3 = 4.
$10 from
She's
Monkey
God.
at
She can do
Typewriter
what she wants.
says, etymologically, gender comes from the Latin genus, and then through French also became the word genre. Is there anything described with genus or genre that has 2 options? Fucking no. Hashtag Josie Rents forever. Yeah, etymology is fun. I enjoy etymology.
Yeah. $5 from Monkey at Typewriter. Jackson was truly awful, but he wasn't boring. Dude killed like 100 men in duels. Once let the other guy shoot him so he could take his time aiming. Yeah. Yeah. Like Jackson lore is wild. It's wild. That's why like most Americans are like, I don't want more of him. Like we don't. And then we elected Trump like 200 years later, you know. All right, great.
Yep. Fund public schools, y'all.
Yep.
$5 from Haley Geringer says, missed most of the show, but I am so glad I got here in time to see Josie go off on the Democrats. Thanks for being who you are. Love it. # Team Josie. I told you. I was like, I was
Always
watching the
happy
super
to
chats.
go off.
I knew how it was going to go.
Oh, I was ranting too much. I wasn't paying attention. $5 from Alishana Silverbow. How do you cook a crocodile in a crock pot? There was a fight in the kitchen. A fish got battered. At # Team Caballero. That's poor fish.
That's
And
battery.
that poor crocodile. It is.
Yum, 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 yum. $5 from Larry Fishman says, why does my makeup look the best right before I wash it off? # Team Josie because trans femme solidarity or whatever. Yeah, that's funny. Like, it looks the best right before you're about to take it off. No.
Oh, yeah. Let it set for a little bit. $10 from Chris Frank. If there was an issue to unite the left, it should be climate change. Frustrating, it's been abandoned. Yeah, it is. Like climate organizations are like in serious distress right now because they're afraid of like doing more layoffs and like breaking down a lot of their infrastructure that they've put together because the climate bump isn't there when a Republican wins office. It's actually quite scary. However,
the climate change
this,
thing has just black-pilled me.
you know, I will give a glimmer of hope. Just today, the first person that was smuggling climate change into the country was arrested today. They actually charged him. The EPA actually arrested him for bringing in refrigerant illegally into the country, breaking climate change rules.
Oh,
so he literally smuggled in and hurt the climate, and the EPA was able to arrest that person. Trump will probably pardon them, but it was definitely something. It was like, oh, okay, that's cool. That's cool.
We would just have to get to zero emissions like yesterday in order to get off of the train tracks that we're currently hurtling down. So, like it's kind of made me like I don't care about very much of what's going on anymore because of that. Like it's the only issue that matters, and we're not going to do anything to address it. So, yeah, again, I'm going to start growing my own food. That's my plan. That's my response. $5 from Sapphic Bibliophile says, thank all of you on TACUS for being such amazing educators. I love how much I learn in every single show. # Team Josie for the poli-sci lesson. Yeah, I either didn't know or I had forgotten the wigs thing. So I'm glad that we have the poli-sci education here going on. It's definitely good. Are you going to cheat? Are you cheating? I'll go get my cat. I swear to God.
Her. He's sneaking on.
Puppy. Puppy.
Little Annie. She was not happy with me doing that, though. She was like, get me off the camera, damn you.
I'll go get my cat while you read
Annie.
this.
Oh, not Metternich. No. $5 from SJL. It's been 15 years since George W. Bush was president. He's still younger than Trump. # Team Josie. Yeah, that's true.
Big boy. There we go. $5 from Beazle says, Josie's an invaluable political voice on the line, but I also want to know why she thinks that tacos should be eaten with a knife and fork. # Team Lux. Thank you, but I don't think we're going to make it. I don't think we're going to make it today. That's okay, though.
$10 from Skip Todius. I think a big reason why the Democratic Party loses so much is because people are tired of hearing the same false hope and broken promises they've been delivering for decades now. # Equipple Josie.
True. €5 from Man with a Drone says, just found Josie on Blue Sky. You need to post more. # Team whoever's losing.
Do.
Thanks.
It's a good way to do it. Yes, I do need to post more, but my current Blue Sky posts are fire. I'm just gonna say it's quality, not quantity.
That's what it's really about.
$10. Yeah, $10 from Larry Fishman. Conservatives, trans people aren't real. Why are you against science? Trans people drops huge pile of peer-reviewed papers proving we're real. Conservatives, I meant kindergarten science. Hashtag Team Joes. See.
I found out that this cat weighs 20 pounds, and now he has to be on a diet.
Oh,
like there's a reason why he's as big as he is, and it's because he's fat. Like,
yeah.
I know people are always like, "Is that a really big cat, or is Luxander just really tiny?" Like, I'm an average sized human person. This cat is just enormous. There you go. All right, I'll let you down. Good boy. Okay, let me get my headphones back on. So $5 from Kitty Tick. Thank you, Kitty Tick. Says, I read a study that said kids born naturally to mothers that had previously needed in vitro have a higher than average rate of being trans. Hashtag Team Lux. That's interesting.
I haven't heard that.
I wonder what that would be about. I'm assuming it's because you require a lot of hormone treatment while you're doing in vitro fertilization. My best guess. Cool,
That's interesting, though. €5 from man with a drone. Had the Lord said unto Adam, come forth, and you shall receive eternal life. But Adam came fifth and won a toaster.
True.
True.
Sad.
That is true. It was sad. It was a sad day for all of mankind.
I think that's the last one. I lost
that's
decisively.
the last one.
Yeah. I lost by
it's okay.
An insurmountable margin.
But you surmounted an unsurmountable large margin last time.
That's true.
Remember?
I don't think we're gonna
randomly got like 7.
Yeah, okay, there's one.
Meternotch in at the last minute there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that's gonna make a difference, but thank you
It's
anyway.
not enough though. Lux, are you ready to defend your deeply held belief about tacos?
Yeah, for sure. My deeply held religious beliefs about tacos. I'm ready for it.
All right. Charging up the clock. And 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so you know when you're eating a taco and there's this like physics thing that happens where you're taking a bite and then it squeezes out the back, okay? There's only one solution. And it's a knife and a fork, okay? And also we're talking about soft tacos because hard tacos aren't even real tacos. Like I'm not even gonna entertain that part of this conversation. So you got your corn tortilla or flour tortilla, whichever way you want to go. And actually the best way is to make an open face taco. I'm raising the stakes. It's an open face taco. So you use the fork to smooth everything out. You make it nice and even. You get a nice even distribution. And then you can start cutting into it. Because then also you can fit more toppings. Okay? It's like nobody wants to get taco juice all over their fingers. Nobody wants to have to like you're eating with a fork at the end when you squooge everything out the back in the first place. So you might as well just start with a knife and fork, okay? It's not a street food anymore. It cannot be a street food. It has to be on a plate. You have to sit down at a restaurant or at a picnic table. It's the only way to eat tacos. Furthermore, I don't know what else to say. I am actually running out of like.
No, Lux, you invented the tostada.
I have independently invented tostadas. Fuck everything about Mexican culture because I just invented something whole cloth. You didn't even need to go to a Mexican restaurant. You came here and a white person told you that the correct way to eat a taco is to actually just make it a tostada. Do tostadas have like a crispy bottom? Because that's the question is like, we doing a soggy bottom?
They do.
Okay, so it's a crispy bottom. Okay, soggy bottom, crispy bottom. Either way, it's still a delicious taco. You're still gonna just get into it with a fork and like bring in the spoon for good measure right at the end because you can really shovel it in that way.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Beautiful. Honestly, the suffering at 45 seconds left to go, I think, is the joy of this whole process.
It is.
I started really floundering at that point. I was like, I don't know what else I'm going to say.
It was so good.
Yep.
The best part.
Good times. Well, thank you everybody for your super chats, regardless of who you voted for. It's still very kind of you. We appreciate it.
It's
Thanks
so
to all of our
fun.
callers.
Yes.
And to all of our viewers.
Yeah. Absolutely. And join us next week when it will be Lux and Arden for the show, which is going to be a lot of fun. And look how long this list of cool people who joined the Patreon. Be on that list. I need to be on this list. I just realized I'm not on this list, which is a crime. Hey, look, the background matches my microphone.